If, in fact, subscriber growth has slowed as Netflix is raising prices, does that change the storyline around what Netflix is trying to do?
I think that there's a lot more pricing power to go, and I know, talking to Victor, he thinks that we're reaching the limits. I can tell you in our household, there's a lot more pricing power. We use it all the time. Netflix were to inch it up to $20 over time. Seems reasonable relative to cable. They also are really starting to fragment their plans, as Victor talked about. So there are many ways of slicing it. So I think the price increase will quickly be old news. There'll be a little bit of churn, perhaps, but ultimately they can have a lot more of that from here.
Victor, what's going on with Snap right now? We've seen something like 8 executives leave in the past year. Where do you stand on that stock, and is there a turnaround in sight for it?
Well, my note yesterday was that I think Evan should take the check from Facebook, from Google, Alphabet, or from Amazon, or from anyone else who comes knocking. Clearly, there's a management issue at the company, and I think that could be handled or fixed with the sale of the company to one of the larger, I think, media companies or internet companies.
Huh? Who has the best use for them?
Well, when I look at what Facebook has been able to do with Instagram in terms of really accelerating the growth, user growth, and as well as the advertising platform on Instagram, I think if they get a hold of Snap, they'll be able to do exactly the same thing.
Really?
Yes.
Why buy them when you've already copied everything they do and taken the best?
The thing is that they haven't really copied that 13 to 24, that captive user base of teenagers, 13 to 24, and they haven't really been able to successfully get at those teenagers. Those teenagers are still using Snap extensively, based on my checks and my surveys. So I think and if you want exposure to that user base, which I think a lot of advertisers really want to get in front of that user base. I think that probably acquiring Snap is probably one of the best ways. Either Google could do it, Facebook could do it, maybe Amazon, or maybe Disney, one of the large media companies as well.
Speaking of advertisers, Henry, there's this interesting dynamic playing out in streaming right now. Our parent company, NBC Universal, Comcast, just announced this over-the-top service that is going to be advertising-based. If you have a cable subscription, you'll get it for free. If not, you can pay and watch. As we see that roll out, Disney, Netflix continuing to expand, what do you think is the key asset that's going to differentiate these things? Is it going to go back to original content? Is it going to be just size of total audience, cable and over-the-top combined?
I think great original content is critical. Lots of folks have a lot of it, though, and so whoever it is, ultimately the service can be so vastly much larger than we already are today. People look at television networks now, we're still caught in this linear world. There's only 24 hours. That's how much content you can have, and sure, there's a library. But you look at that compared to how Netflix is approaching it, where it can be ultimately many multiples of the size so that anybody can be served at any time. There's a great show that you want to watch. It doesn't have to feed 50 million people. 500,000 people addicted to it is all you need. So I think ultimately what's going to determine is the size of the library. And it sounds odd to think about it, but the old linear TV networks are very handicapped here because they haven't been pursuing that.
Victor, we've been talking a lot about what the next act is for Apple and the next act is in general for tech overall, almost the way the iPhone and the smartphone era just disrupted everything, spurred new companies, new industries, et cetera. What's the next thing going to be, right? On the heels of CES last week, on the heels of the Detroit Auto Show this week, is it going to be mobility? Is it going to be things like self-driving connected cars and other types of vehicles?
Yeah, I don't cover Apple, but I definitely think I've done a lot of work over the past year on self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles.
I know.
I think that will. Thank you for acknowledging that. I think that's the next big wave. I think it'll take a bit longer than I had anticipated originally. I thought 2019 would have been the year where you see a lot of the autonomous vehicles on the road, but I think that'll be pushed back quite significantly. It'll take a lot of engineering. I think a lot of engineering resources need to be applied to that technology to get it to the point where it needs to be, it becomes ubiquitous, not just in major cities, but across the globe. And I think companies like Waymo is in a pole position. You'll see Uber, you see Lyft, I think, making big investments across that, as well as the traditional automobile companies, for example, GM.
Although we're still wrestling with sort of the consumer pushback, and some of these reports of the opposition to Waymo cars in in Arizona. I mean, people still have to get their heads around this sort of technology.
I think it is much farther away than people think. I think perhaps in very limited applications, a specific route in a specific city where buses are effectively, okay, a computer's driving it, but it's on its own track, fine. But this idea that we are all suddenly going to have oodles of time that we don't have now because in a very short period, we're all going to be facing each other in a living room of a car while it drives itself, forget it. Long, decades away.